The eviction notice trembled in my hands as I read the same line for the fourth time. 30 days to vacate the premises. My mother stood in the doorway of what used to be my childhood bedroom, arms crossed, her mouth set in that familiar line of disappointment I'd known my entire 43 years. "Darlene, you knew this was coming," she said, her voice carrying that same tone she'd used when I was 8 and tracked mud through her pristine kitchen. "The rent's going up to $1,200 a month starting next week. Brandon needs the extra money for little Sophia's medical bills." My chest tightened as the words sank in. $1,200. For a room I'd been paying $400 for, in the house I'd been helping maintain for the past 2 years since Dad died. The same house where I slept on an air mattress, because my real bedroom furniture had been moved to the garage to make room for Brandon's old exercise equipment that he never used. "Mom, I've been paying every utility bill, buying all the groceries, and covering the property taxes," I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay calm. "I can't afford $1,200 on top of everything else." She shrugged, and something cold settled in my stomach. "Then maybe it's time you found your own place. Brandon's family needs stability right now." The way she said Brandon's family hit me like a physical blow. Not your brother's family, or even just Brandon and Melissa. Brandon's family. The chosen ones. I watched her turn and walk back toward the kitchen, where she'd no doubt start preparing Brandon's favorite pot roast for Sunday dinner, just like she had every week since he moved back to town 3 months ago. My hands were shaking as I folded the notice and shoved it into my purse. Through the thin walls, I could hear Melissa laughing at something on her phone in the living room. My former living room, where I used to watch movies with Mom on Sunday nights before Brandon decided his growing family needed more space. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the one being asked to leave so they could have more room, while I'd been the one keeping this place running since Dad's funeral. That evening, I sat in my car outside Walmart, staring at my bank statement on my phone. After paying this month's utilities, groceries, and Mom's property insurance, I had exactly $843 to my name. The math was brutal and simple. I couldn't afford to stay, and I couldn't afford to leave. My supervisor position at the insurance office paid decent money, but not enough to cover first month's rent, security deposit, and moving expenses all at once. I felt trapped in a cage made of my own kindness. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker, Valencia. "Girl, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. Everything okay?" Valencia Chen had been my desk neighbor for 3 years, and she had this way of seeing through my polite deflections that both comforted and terrified me. I'd been avoiding her concerned looks all week, but sitting here in the parking lot, surrounded by families loading groceries into their cars, I felt the overwhelming urge to tell someone the truth. I called her back. "Val, can I ask you something without you thinking I'm completely pathetic?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "If your family was treating you like hired help while you paid their bills, would you stay because it's family, or would you leave even if it meant struggling alone?" The silence stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. When Valencia finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Darlene, honey, family doesn't charge you $1,200 to sleep on the floor of a house you're maintaining. That's not family. That's exploitation with a blood relation." Something shifted inside my chest when she said that word, exploitation. I've been calling it helping family, or doing my part. But Valencia had named it for what it really was. "But where would I go?" I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "I've been looking at apartments online, and everything decent requires first and last month's rent plus a security deposit. That's over $3,000 I don't have." "Stay with me," Valencia said without hesitation. My lease allows guests for up to 90 days, and honestly, I could use help with my portion of the rent. You can save money and figure out your next move without your mother holding financial threats over your head. The offer hit me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person, but accepting it felt like admitting my own family didn't want me. The next morning, I walked into Mom's kitchen to find Brandon sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone while Melissa fed baby Sophia in my old spot by the window. The sight of them so comfortable in what used to be my space made my stomach clench, but what really caught my attention was the glossy catalog spread across the table. Baby luxury strollers. The cover read, with price tags that made my eyes water. The cheapest model was $800. Morning, Dar, Brandon said without looking up. Mom told me about the rent situation. Don't take it personal. We just need the extra income right now. He gestured at the catalog like it explained everything. Sophia's getting bigger, and we want to get her one of these premium strollers before she outgrows her current one. The safety features are incredible, and Melissa read that the suspension system is better for babies developing spines. I stared at him, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. You need my rent money for a stroller? The words came out flatter than I intended, but Brandon just shrugged. It's not just a stroller, Dar. It's an investment in Sophia's health and development. Plus, Melissa wants to start taking her to the fancy playground across town, and you really need the right equipment for those walking paths. Melissa looked up from feeding Sophia, her expression bright and oblivious. Oh, Darlene, you should see the reviews for this one. She pointed to a sleek black model with more features than my car. It has a built-in sound system, cup holders, and the fabric is stain-resistant. Brandon's mom is being so generous helping us afford it. The casual way she said, Brandon's mom, not your mom, or even just your mother, hit me like ice water. In Melissa's world, I didn't even exist as family. How much is that one? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. $1,500, but it's worth every penny, Melissa gushed. We figured with the rent increase, we'll have it paid off in just over a month. It's perfect timing, really. Perfect timing. I felt something hot and bitter rise in my throat as I realized they'd already spent my money in their minds. They weren't asking if I could afford the increase or if I needed time to adjust my budget. They'd decided my financial sacrifice was worth their convenience, and now they were showing me exactly what my displacement would buy them. I excused myself and walked to my room, closing the door before pulling out my phone to text Valencia. Is that offer still open? I think I need to take you up on it sooner than I thought. Her response came back immediately. Absolutely. Want to talk about it over lunch today? For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. Someone was treating me like a person whose feelings and circumstances mattered, and the contrast to my family's casual dismissal was so stark. It made my chest ache. At lunch, Valencia took one look at my face and ordered me a double shot of espresso without asking. Okay, spill it. What happened this morning? I told her about the stroller catalog, about Melissa's casual dismissal of my existence, about Brandon's assumption that my financial sacrifice was just the natural order of things. Valencia's expression grew darker with each detail, and by the time I finished, she was gripping her coffee cup so tight her knuckles were white. Darlene, listen to me very carefully, she said, leaning forward. What you just described isn't normal family dynamics. That's financial abuse. They're using your emotional attachment to family obligation to exploit you, and they're not even pretending to respect you while they do it. She pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm texting my landlord right now to confirm the guest policy. You're moving in this weekend. and we're going to help you save enough money to get your own place on your terms, not theirs. The relief that washed over me was so intense, I almost started crying right there in the restaurant. But what do I tell them? Mom's going to guilt me about abandoning the family, and Brandon will probably say I'm being dramatic. Valencia's laugh was sharp and humorless. Honey, you're not abandoning anyone. You're stopping them from abandoning you while they pick your pockets clean. There's a difference. She was right, but the thought of actually confronting them made my hands shake. I'd spent so many years being the good daughter, the one who never caused problems, who always put family first. The idea of standing up for myself felt foreign and terrifying. What if they're right, though? What if I am being selfish? I whispered. Valencia reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Darlene, when's the last time any of them asked how you were doing? When's the last time they showed concern for your well-being, your finances, your future? I opened my mouth to answer and then closed it again. I couldn't remember. Not since Dad died, anyway. Maybe not even before that. Brandon had always been the golden child, the successful one with the perfect family, and I'd been the dependable one, the one who handled the boring stuff like bills and maintenance and emotional labor. They don't see me as a person, I said, the words feeling strange and sad coming out of my mouth. They see me as a function. Exactly, Valencia said firmly. And functions don't get to have needs or boundaries or dreams. But you're not a function, Darlene. You're a whole person who deserves to be treated with basic respect and consideration. She squeezed my hand. And when you stop performing that function for them, they're going to realize real quick what they lost. The question is, are you ready to let them? That evening, I went home with a new sense of purpose. But what I found in the kitchen stopped me cold. Mom was sitting at the table with a stack of papers, calculator in hand, looking more animated than I'd seen her in months. "Oh, good, you're home," she said without looking up. "I've been going through the finances, and with your new rent contribution, we'll actually have enough left over each month for some nice upgrades around here." She spread the papers out like she was sharing good news. "I'm thinking we can finally replace that old washing machine, maybe get one of those fancy front-loading ones. And Brandon mentioned wanting to convert the basement into a proper playroom for Sophia, so we'll need to budget for flooring and paint." Each item she mentioned felt like another weight added to my chest. She wasn't just taking my money. She was already spending it on improvements I'd never benefit from. "Mom," I said carefully, "what about the bills I've been paying? The utilities, the groceries, the property taxes?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you can keep handling those. This is just extra money for the things we actually need." Extra money. For things we actually need. As if the utilities and food and taxes I'd been covering weren't actual needs, just my little hobby expenses. I walked to my room and sat on my air mattress, staring at the stack of moving boxes I'd been too depressed to unpack. Since Dad died. On impulse, I grabbed my laptop and started going through my bank statements from the past 2 years. The numbers were staggering. I'd paid over $18,000 in utilities, groceries, property taxes, and house maintenance. $18,000 that had kept this family comfortable and secure while I slept on the floor and ate ramen for dinner most nights. My phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Cordelia, Mom's sister. "Honey, your mother mentioned you're moving out. I hope it's not because of money troubles. You know your father would have wanted you to stay close to family." The message made my blood boil. Of course Mom had called Cordelia, probably spinning some story about how I was abandoning my poor widowed mother for selfish reasons. But Cordelia didn't know about the rent increase, the stroller fund, or the fact that I'd been single-handedly supporting this household. I took a screenshot of my banking app showing the $18,000 in payments and texted it back to Cordelia with a simple message. This is what I've contributed to keeping Mom comfortable over the past 2 years. She's raising my rent to $1,200 a month so Brandon can buy a luxury stroller. I'm not abandoning family. I'm stopping family from abandoning me. The 3 dots showing Cordelia was typing appeared and disappeared several times before she finally responded. Oh, honey, I had no idea. Your mother didn't mention any of this. The validation from someone in my extended family felt like a dam breaking. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't selfish, and I wasn't wrong. Even Cordelia, who'd always been Mom's biggest supporter, could see the injustice when presented with the facts. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of finality. I'd spent all night packing my few belongings, and Valencia was coming at 10 to help me move. The house was unusually quiet. Brandon's family had gone to some baby expo to research more expensive purchases they could make with my money. Mom was in the kitchen, making her famous cinnamon rolls, probably thinking the smell of my childhood favorite would guilt me into staying. "You're really doing this?" she asked when I walked in with my first box. Her voice carried that particular blend of hurt and accusation that had controlled me for decades. "After everything this family has been through, you're just going to walk away?" I set the box down and looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. She was smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes held the same manipulative spark they'd always had when she needed to bend one of us to her will. "Mom, I've paid $18,000 in bills for this house over the past 2 years," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I've slept on an air mattress while Brandon's exercise equipment sits in my old room collecting dust. I've watched you prioritize a luxury stroller over having any concern for my financial well-being or living situation." She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not walking away from family. I'm walking away from being treated like an ATM with no feelings." Her face cycled through several expressions: surprise, anger, and finally that familiar wounded look that had made me cave so many times before. "Darlene, honey, we never asked you to pay for everything. You offered to help after your father died, and we were grateful." The rewriting of history was so smooth, so practiced. I almost believed it for a second. Almost. "I offered to help temporarily while we figured things out," I corrected. "That was 2 years ago, and now you're charging me triple rent to fund Brandon's shopping sprees while I can barely afford groceries." Valencia's car pulled into the driveway, and I felt a surge of relief. My ally was here. But that ends today. Valencia knocked and entered without waiting, taking in the scene immediately. "Mrs. Patterson," she said politely, then turned to me. "Ready?" The simple question, asked with such clear support, gave me the strength I needed. Mom looked between us, probably calculating whether she could manipulate this stranger who clearly saw through her tactics. "You're making a mistake, Darlene," Mom said, her voice taking on that ominous tone she used when gentle manipulation failed. "Family is all you have in this world. Don't burn bridges you might need to cross again." The threat was barely veiled, but instead of the usual fear, I felt something unexpected. Pity. She was so used to controlling through guilt and fear that she couldn't even recognize genuine boundaries when they appeared. "You're right, Mom," I said, surprising her with my calm agreement. "Family is important. That's why I'm so disappointed that mine chose to exploit me instead of value me." I walked past her to get my final box, and she followed me, her composure finally cracking. "Exploit you? Darlene, that's ridiculous. We've given you a place to live, family support." You've given me an air mattress in a room that used to be mine, charged me rent to live in a house I maintain, and treated me like an inconvenience when your real family needed space. Valencia appeared in the doorway, clearly hearing every word, but staying respectfully quiet. And now you want to triple my rent? To buy Brandon's baby a luxury stroller while I eat ramen and save quarters for laundry. Mom's face flushed red. That stroller is a necessity. You don't understand because you don't have children of your own. The words hit exactly where she'd aimed them, at the old wound of my failed engagement and the children I'd never had. But instead of the usual shame, I felt something else. Clarity. You're right. I don't have children. But I do understand what it means to be responsible for my own expenses, instead of demanding someone else sacrifice their financial security for my wants. I handed Valencia my final box and pulled out the letter I'd written at 3 in the morning. Mom, this explains everything you need to know about the bills, the account numbers, and when payments are due. As of today, I'm no longer covering any household expenses. You can ask your favorite son for help with those. I set the letter on the kitchen counter next to her cinnamon rolls. Her eyes went wide as she read the header. Utility account information and payment transfer. Darlene, you can't be serious. The electric bill alone is over $200 a month, and the property taxes are Brandon's problem now, I finished. He's the one benefiting from this house, and he's the one you're prioritizing. Time for him to step up like an actual adult. Valencia touched my arm gently. Ready? She asked again. This time, I nodded with complete certainty. As we walked toward the door, Mom called after us, her voice rising to that particular pitch that used to make me freeze in my tracks. Darlene, you get back here right now. You can't just abandon your responsibilities. But I kept walking, and for the first time in my adult life, her voice had no power over me. The last thing I heard as Valencia's car door slammed shut was Mom frantically dialing her phone, probably calling Brandon to tell him his sister had finally lost her mind. Little did she know, I'd actually found it. The first call came at 6:30 that evening, just as Valencia and I were celebrating my freedom with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. Brandon's name flashed on my phone screen, and I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, his voice was tight with panic. Darlene, what the hell is this letter Mom gave me? You can't just dump all the household bills on me without warning. Actually, I can, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. You wanted the extra rent money for your stroller fund, so now you get the responsibility that comes with it. Welcome to being an adult, Brandon. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted to that wheedling tone he'd used as a kid when he wanted something. Come on, Dar. You know I can't afford all this stuff right now. My job at the dealership barely covers our apartment rent. I laughed, actually laughed, at the irony. Funny how you suddenly understand financial pressure when it's your problem instead of mine. Valencia raised her wine glass in a silent toast, grinning at my newfound backbone. Brandon, for 2 years I've been paying for everything while you and Melissa treated me like hired help. Now you can figure out how to be responsible for your own family's expenses. But what about Mom? She's on a fixed income. The concern for our mother's welfare that had been completely absent when they were planning to triple my rent was suddenly urgent now that he might have to contribute. Then maybe you shouldn't have encouraged her to kick out the daughter who was actually supporting her, I replied. Melissa seemed pretty excited about that $1,500 stroller. Maybe she can return it and help with the electric bill instead. The second call came from Mom an hour later. her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Darlene, Brandon says he can't afford to take over the bills. You have to come back and fix this mess you've created." The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. Even now, she was framing my escape from exploitation as a mess I'd created rather than consequences they'd earned. "Mom, I didn't create this mess. I was the only thing holding it together," I said firmly. "You chose to prioritize Brandon's wants over my basic dignity. Now you get to live with that choice." Valencia squeezed my hand encouragingly as I continued. "I hope that stroller is worth losing the daughter who actually cared about your well-being." When I hung up, Valencia raised her glass again. "To Darlene Patterson, who finally stopped setting herself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm." The toast felt like a benediction, like the official end of my old life and the beginning of something entirely new. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Valencia's sunny living room, actually reading a book for pleasure for the first time in years, when my phone started buzzing with a series of increasingly frantic texts. The first was from Melissa. "Darlene, please call me. We really need to talk." Then Brandon. "The electricity got shut off. Mom's crying. Can you please just help us figure this out?" Finally, Mom herself. "Your brother had to take out a payday loan to cover the bills. This is getting ridiculous." I showed the messages to Valencia, who was working on her laptop at the kitchen table. She looked up with raised eyebrows. "Payday loan? Already? It's only been 3 weeks." The schadenfreude felt delicious and terrible at the same time. "Apparently, financial responsibility is harder than they thought," I said, setting my phone aside without responding to any of the messages. But the calls kept coming. Aunt Cordelia phoned that evening, her voice carefully neutral. "Honey, your mother asked me to check on you. She's worried about the family situation." I could hear the unspoken question. Had I lost my mind? "I'm doing great, Aunt Cordelia," I said honestly. "I'm sleeping in an actual bed. I can afford groceries, and nobody's charging me rent to live somewhere I'm not wanted." "But what about your mother? She says the bills are overwhelming without your help." There it was, the guilt trip delivered by proxy. "Aunt Cordelia, do you remember what I told you about contributing $18,000 over 2 years?" Silence. Mom has 2 choices. She can downsize to something she can afford on her fixed income, or Brandon can step up and support the lifestyle he's been enjoying at my expense. The breaking point came when Melissa showed up at my office. Security called to tell me I had a visitor, and there she was in the lobby, holding baby Sophia and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Darlene, please," she said, before I could even sit down. "Brandon lost his job yesterday because he's been so stressed about money he's been making mistakes at work. We might lose our apartment." I looked at Sophia, innocent in all this family drama, and felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered the luxury stroller catalog, the casual way they'd planned to spend my sacrifice, the complete dismissal of my humanity. "Melissa, I'm sorry Brandon lost his job, but that's not my responsibility to fix," I said, gently but firmly. "You're both adults. You'll figure it out." Her face crumpled. "But we were counting on exploiting me indefinitely," I finished. "I know. That was your mistake, not mine." 6 months later, I was signing the lease on my own 1-bedroom apartment when Valencia called with an update she'd heard through the family grapevine. "Your mom sold the house," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Apparently, she's moving into a senior living community, and Brandon's family had to move in with Melissa's parents." I felt a complex mix of emotions, but regret wasn't one of them. Good for her, I said, meaning it. She should have downsized years ago instead of depending on me to subsidize a lifestyle she couldn't afford. My new apartment was small, but bright, with a real bedroom, a kitchen where I could cook actual meals, and most importantly, it was mine. No one could raise my rent to fund someone else's luxury purchases or kick me out to make room for the favorite child. The final contact came as I was hanging pictures on my new walls. Mom called, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Darlene, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. Maybe I didn't appreciate how much you were doing for us. The closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. Maybe. I agreed, not making it easy for her. Brandon's been having a hard time finding work, and Melissa's parents aren't very patient with the baby crying at night. They're thinking about moving to a cheaper state. There was a long pause. I miss our Sunday movie nights. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. Then I remembered the air mattress, the dismissive shrugs, the casual cruelty of being treated like an ATM with feelings that didn't matter. Mom, you chose Brandon's comfort over my dignity every single time it mattered. You can't miss something you never actually valued. I hung up and turned back to my picture hanging, where Valencia was helping me arrange my new living room. Any regrets? She asked, watching me carefully. I looked around my small, perfect space, thought about my growing savings account, my weekend plans that belonged entirely to me, and the peace that came with knowing I'd never again wake up wondering if my own family saw me as human. None whatsoever, I said, and meant every word. Sometimes the best family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. I learned that blood doesn't entitle people to bleed you dry, and that loving yourself enough to walk away from exploitation isn't selfish. It's survival. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in my place? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and comment where you're watching from.